Hello everyone. Right, today we're going to carry on looking at Walking Away and we are going to do some annotation of it today. We're going to look at the context a little bit before we do so, and then we're going to annotate the first part of the poem. Make sure you've got the anthology in front of you. Make sure that you are regularly pausing this because I might be going through it a little bit more quickly than you can write everything down. Like I said yesterday, some of the annotations that I've received are absolutely stunning, beautiful, detailed, and they'll be so helpful for you when you're coming to revise for this part of the exam. So keep that up, but just bear in mind you should have your anthology in front of you to be annotating into, and you need to keep pausing me when I'm waffling on. Okay, here's a little bit of context about Cecil Day-Lewis. He's the poet. I always advise that you write this somewhere in your anthology, either at the top of the page or at the bottom of the page, but I wouldn't do it close to the poem because you're likely to need that space. So find yourself a space where you think you're not going to be annotating and put this information there. Right, so he's brought up by his father, who's a clergyman, so he's a religious man, and his mum died when he was 2. So we've got a sense that parental relationships, or particularly the relationship between his father, would have been strengthened by the absence of his mother, and this is a poem about a father and son relationship as well, so that's a relevant little bit of context. I probably wouldn't write this bit down, but he's a very successful poet. He was poet laureate and he was professor of poetry at Oxford University, so very successful. Again, I wouldn't write all of this down, but he's got 4 children. I might jot that he's got 4 children down, but I don't need to go into any of the specific details. So he's got really successful children. And this poem is at least semi-autobiographical because it focuses on that youngest child who's a TV critic and writer, Sean Day-Lewis. Okay, so originally the poem had the subtitle for Sean, so we know that this is about that son and about his relationship with that son, and that is important. Your version doesn't have that on, but I would probably add it because it's the most important bit of context, I think. So it was written as the poet looks back on his son's first day at boarding school. Now Sean is 7 when that happens, so very, very young to be sent away. He's the last of his children to go to boarding school. All of them have been to boarding school previously. And this is his final child to go to boarding school at the age of 7. He's a boarder, so we would be staying away for an extended period of time. Ordinarily, they would stay away for a term, but then have a slightly extended break when they came back, so they might have a longer break than we would normally. The poet had been to boarding school himself, and so he knew about kind of leaving his parents. He knew about going to boarding school from the perspective as a child and what it's like as a child. But this poem is flipping that, and it's a child going to boarding school from the perspective of a parent, and the feelings that he has around it. That point in purple is really important. So in this poem, we're going to see that the poet struggles with sending his child to boarding school. He finds it difficult. And lots of people, lots of candidates just go, well, I don't know why, because he's chosen to send his kid. It's totally his own fault. And whilst I understand that point of view, what we have to understand is that from Day-Lewis's perspective, from the poet's perspective, sending his child to boarding school is giving him access to the absolute best education available and to the best opportunities. And so it's very much what they do. It might not be what other people do, it might not be what your family do, but at this point, when the poem's written, the best education is available in boarding schools. And so sending Sean to boarding school is an act of love. He sends him because he wants him to be a successful adult and he wants him to have access to the best education that he can. So whilst we might find it a bit strange that he's so upset about the thing that he's chosen to do, we need to understand that from his perspective, he's doing it from a position of love and in order to better his children's lives. Okay. We're going to look at the poem again. I don't think you can reread a poem enough times. Every time you read it, you're going to find something different. So you looked at it last lesson, but we're going to look at it again today. It is 18 years ago, almost to the day, a sunny day with leaves just turning. The touchlines new ruled. since I watched you play your first game of football, then, like a satellite wrenched from its orbit, go drifting away behind a scatter of boys. I can see you walking away from me towards the school with the pathos of a half-fledged thing set free into a wilderness. The gait of one who finds no path where the path should be. That hesitant figure eddying away like a winged seed loosened from its parent stem, as something I never quite grasped to convey about nature's give and take, the small, the scorching ordeals which fire one's irresolute clay. I have had worse partings, but none that so gnaws at my mind still. Perhaps it is roughly saying what God alone could perfectly show, how selfhood begins with a walking away, and love is proved in the letting go. Okay, so what happens in the poem? The speaker narrates an event that took place 18 years ago, the sending of his son to boarding school. He describes how he watched his son play a game of football and then walk away towards his new school. And at that moment, he realises that his son is no longer dependent on him, no longer under his rule, if you like. It's not the worst part in the poet has experienced. We know from the context that his mother died, but also his wife dies, and so I think he's referencing the fact that those partings are worse, more fixed, and can't be undone. But that this is one that's stuck with him for a long time. In the second half of the poem, I think we move to the point where the poet is realising that true love and care for a child isn't holding on to him, but letting him go. You know, if that's saying, if you love something, let it go. And I think that's drawing on those same ideas. Knowing yourself truly begins when you're able to sort of make decisions on your own and move away from your parents. And obviously, that's linking to some of the similar ideas that we saw in Mother Any Distance, in the sense that Armitage felt going out onto his own. So we can start to see already where we're going to be able to make these links between the poems. Okay, task one, you're going to have to pause me. Just skim back through the poem. We've looked at it a couple of times. You should be able to skim through. And in your anthology, highlight everything that you can see about nature. As you're highlighting, have a think about why the poet might have done this and what he's saying about parenting and nature, the act of letting go and nature, and so on. Okay, task two. So any unfamiliar words. I've picked some. There might be others. If there are any other words, you can just check those on Google or message me on Satchel1 and I'll define them for you. But there are a few. Again, you're going to need to pause me to go through and annotate these words in your anthology. Okay, so now we're moving on to the annotation. You're going to need your anthologies. You're going to need to write quite small, and you need to try and get as much detail as you can. Right, so we're starting with that first line. It is 18 years ago. It's unusual to write about a memory in the present tense. It is 18 years ago. I think that gives us a sense that it's not just something he's remembering, it's something that he's feeling. He can remember those exact feelings, like almost this day has never left him. Even though it's been 18 years ago, and that's a hugely long time ago, he still feels like he can live that particular moment. It is 18 years ago, and he's back there straight away. I think the fact that he's thinking of a memory that happened 18 years ago just consolidates its importance. I can't think of that many things, that happened 18 years ago myself. You won't, because you're all little chidlers and you're not even 18, but the fact that he's still thinking about it gives us that sense of the enormity of this moment and how important this particular day and this particular event was for him. I think given that we know what the poem is about, there's a sense that potentially this is more important because it's his last child, it's his youngest child, and so he knows now that there's no children at home anymore because they're all at boarding school, and maybe that's adding some significance to the moment. A sunny day with leaves just turning, and the leaves are just turning because we're moving into autumn. So sometimes boarding school terms would start a little bit later and end a little bit earlier. So it's around autumn time, and the leaves are just starting to turn to that different colour. But we've got that sense that this is a point of change. This is something that's new that's happening or moving into a different period of time. And we could possibly even link that to the, turning over a new leaf. This is a new start for Sean, and a new start for his father, because there won't be those children at home anymore. But this is a moment, a pivotal moment in time and in this year. And we've got the touchlines new ruled. So literally, Sean's playing football, and the white lines of the football field have just been drawn and they're fresh. I assume that over time they get eroded away, they get worn away, you can't see them as clearly, but at this point, new ruled, fresh start. Again, this idea of the new beginning. But I think there's probably something in new ruled, because you wouldn't automatically use that word to describe the edges of the football field. And so I think there's a sense that there are new rules, that Sean will be new ruled, because there's somebody new in charge of his life and his day-to-day events. And so it's almost a passing of that control to somebody else or something else. He feels like he's passing the parental responsibilities to this institution, and they will kind of establish new rules for Sean, and those rules will be different to the ones that he's had. So there's a sense here of that feeling of he's not going to be in control of his youngest son anymore. I don't think that's in a sort of manipulative, controlling sort of way. I think that's a supportive, looking after kind of way. Right, then, like a satellite wrenched from its orbit, goes drifting away. So he compares his son here, this natural simile, like a satellite wrenched from its orbit. Let's look at the idea of wrench. The verb wrench means to pull or twist suddenly and violently. There's a sense that it's not sudden, because he knows, he's arranged for his son to go. But I think the realisation that he's going is sudden and just hits him. I think it's painful to him as a father to let Sean go, and he feels sort of an immediate hit of pain as Sean starts to move towards the school building, moving physically further away from him, and he feels that impact of it. It's a really violent, really painful verb. And I don't think that's Sean's feelings. I totally think that's the feelings of his father, and he's feeling hurt, even though he knows that Sean is safe. Right, we're going to look at satellite in a little bit more detail on the next slide. So let's move on to go drifting away. This is an jammed line between the two stanzas, and I think it emphasises that idea that drifting away. I think drifting has connotations of sort of an aimlessness. I love words that go lessness. An aimlessness, because Sean doesn't quite know what to do or where to go, and so he's moving in a sort of uncertain way. But I think the fact that that line then goes into the next stanza reflects that drifting, that it didn't stop where it's supposed to stop, but it drifts into the next stanza. And I think that's a nice little bit of structure there that the poet's used. Again, we've got that present tense, go drifting away, present tense, like it is 18 years ago. And he's just reliving that moment. I think we are supposed to recognise that the poet isn't remembering this, he's just living it again. It's like he's there, he feels like it was just yesterday, and he can remember everything really specifically, really in detail, and he's living through that moment again. Okay. So, like a satellite, wrenched from its orbit. So here's the definition of a satellite on the top. It's a moon, a planet, or a machine that orbits a planet or a star. Now, at the point where the poem was written, space exploration was new. So the idea of using the word satellite, now I think we'd automatically think of that man-made satellite. But I think it's much more likely that the satellite that he's talking about is the moon. And that links to that natural idea. If it's the moon, Sean going to boarding school feels like the moon being ripped away from the earth. So we've got some of the scale of the earth and the moon to reflect the size of the parent in relation to the child. But if the moon were torn away from the Earth, there would be catastrophic consequences for that. Don't want to be like really sciencey, but I will be. So like the moon does a weird pulley thing with the tides. It's technical terms. Don't worry if you can't keep up. The pulley thing with the moon and the tides also controls werewolves. So there might be a problem with werewolves if the moon was torn away. But really, it's just about, it would be so unnatural and it would have massive consequences for that to happen. So he's talking about this enormous event. It's so big, this moment of his youngest son going into boarding school is so enormous for him that he equates it to the moon being torn away from the Earth, which is massive. Okay, stanza 2. Behind a scatter of boys, I like the collective noun scatter. A group of boys are called a scatter of boys. They're not, but I like that Day-Lewis has chosen to call them in this way. And I think that emphasises that they are in a similar position to Sean. So Sean is aimless and doesn't really know where he should be going. And a lot of the other children feel the same. There'll be lots of children who are starting boarding school in the same position as Sean. They're only 7. They don't really know what they're supposed to do or where they're supposed to go, and so they're all over the place. And there doesn't really seem to be that order to it. And I do think that's the same as Sean's drifted. So Sean's not on his own, wondering about, not sure what to do. A lot of the other boys are doing the same. I can see you walking away from me. I always think that's really emotive. Obviously, it links to the title, but you walking away from me when he sent him, but he still feels abandoned by it. It feels like his son is leaving him. It feels really emotive, that moment. It really simplifies everything down. I can see you walking away from me. And the present tense again is there, you walking away, because he's there. He's reliving this moment. It's exactly the same in his memory as it was when he actually experienced it. And it's a constant, that present tense verb that lots of the poems are using to represent that kind of infinite, constant sense that he's moving away, the constant changing, the way that his life is going to be so different, or both of their lives are going to be so different after this event. But I think there's something really emotive about that, you walking away from me. With the pathos of a half-fledged thing set free. The pathos is ambiguous for me, so a sense of feeling sad or sorry for someone. Does the father feel sorry for his son because he's going to go off into this sort of scary new world? Or does the son feel sorry for the father because he's going to be abandoned and he's going to struggle with it? I don't know. Poetry very often is very ambiguous, and when it is, then that's lovely because we're able to talk about multiple different things. I think there'd be a lot to say about this yellow line. So describe this one as a half-fledged thing set free. Half-fledged means linking to those baby chicks, so almost ready to leave the nest, maybe. Maybe the sense that he thinks his son is too young because he's only half-fledged, he's not a fledgling. He's a baby bird that isn't quite ready to leave the nest, and yet here he is having to leave the nest, he's having to go and live somewhere else. Maybe this is him struggling with whether it was right to send him. Is he too young? Is he not ready to go to boarding school yet? Should he have kept him home longer? These ideas that are running through the poem. The idea that he calls him a thing. So there's obviously the zoomorphism of half-fledged. He's comparing him to a bird, and that's contrasted with him being compared to the noun thing. I think it gives a sense of distance, a sense that he feels like he doesn't know him anymore, he doesn't know who he is, even in that moment that he's aware that there could be this massive consequence to sending him to boarding school where he struggles to kind of know him. And then again, that's contrasted with set free, because he's not free as he is sent into a boarding school where he's going to be following somebody else's rules. It's not free. So I think that maybe is bringing us back to the zoomorphism, that when a bird flies the nest, they go free. Maybe it's all linked to that idea of whether Sean's ready to go or not. Set free into a wilderness, but it's not a wilderness, it's a school. I think it's a wilderness to him because it's a place that he can't control. It's so beyond his kind of ability to manage what happens to Sean on a regular basis. Here he's a 7-year-old and he's going somewhere. He's going to be away from his family for weeks and weeks and weeks. And so that feels like the wilderness, maybe to both of them, maybe to the poet because it's, I don't know, this whole thing that he can't control, and maybe to Sean because it's so unknown. It's an entirely new life for Sean, and it would be scary. Maybe it's less scary for Sean if he knows his siblings are there, or because he knows all of his older siblings have gone. I don't know, but it's being described as a wilderness because it's a place kind of beyond both of their controls, I think. And then Sean has the gait of one who finds no path where the path should be. So the word gait meaning the way somebody walks, the rather distinct walk. And it's the gait of one who finds no path where the path should be. So literally, I think that means that Sean doesn't really know where he should be walking because he doesn't really know where he's supposed to go because he hasn't been to boarding school before, might have visited, but he doesn't really know what he's supposed to do on this particular day. So he's moving in a way that shows that uncertainty. He doesn't know where to go. But I think there's a metaphor in here. I think metaphorically the father was his son's path. He decided where he went and why and who he met and all of those kind of things, total control of where he went and what he did. And now he's given up that control, and so all of a sudden there is no path. But it suggests to us that Sean needs to be the one who creates the path, who establishes that path and decides where he needs to go and what he needs to be doing. And I think that idea that of the path is representing all these ideas that of him kind of deciding his own way in the world. And I don't think that the speaker thinks that that's going to happen immediately, like Sean walks into boarding school and he's a fully grown adult. That's not what it is, but that potentially this boarding school will be the place that helps to shape what his future looks like. And so in that sense, he's going to establish his own path. Okay, final thing from me. If you've got any questions about what I've gone through today, please drop me an email, message me on Satchel One. I'm totally happy to talk through anything with you at all. But I thought this might be a useful thing to look at before moving on to the second part of the poem. Don't need to submit it to me, but if you did, that'd be great as well. Have a think about what links you can already see between Walking Away and Mother Any Distance. Like, what could you compare in terms of the ideas in the poem? Can you think of any similarities in the language? Straight away, what's jumping out to me, we've got zoomorphism with both of them, where they're both compared to these sort of fledgling birds. That'd be an easy connection to make in terms of language. And then can you do the same with follower? So what are the links that you could make in terms of ideas or in terms of language? Hope you're all well.